from where I'll begin from where I think many of us already are, which is that I believe there are serious problems with our current approach to the environmental crisis, and that they stem from our relationship with the Earth itself. So climate change and loss of biodiversity are, as I see it, symptoms of a disease. They are not the disease. The disease is to do with failings of our current human culture. So I believe our current human culture is failing, and I think there are three immediate causes of that failure. The first is our failure to feel our relationship with the Earth. We've come to know about the Earth, but not feel our relationship to it. The second is that our current culture cannot cooperate adequately to meet the threats that we have generated. The third is that the mass of ordinary people are overwhelmed and passive, while scientists, politicians, the media, and activists slug it out in public life, leaving everybody else overwhelmed, maybe guilty, but certainly not engaged. I think these three aspects of the failure of our culture are all interrelated and might be addressed by a new approach. So with that in mind, I'd like us to start to begin to think about the Earth itself and what it is. We know that human beings are part of a system of life on Earth that began around 3.5 billion years ago, and whose foundation was and is the bacteria which began the process of creating the atmosphere that we now have, oxidized the rocks and began to create the soils. This life begat life, and we became a living planet, not only inhabited by a myriad of creatures, but whose very systems are maintained by living things. The plants create the oxygen that we breathe. The resulting climatic systems nurture different life forms across the globe. As a result, the Earth exists, and we know it to be one great and powerful living system on which we absolutely depend, and it is the only planet we know with abundant life. It's also true, I believe, that the power of the Earth is very evident, and it's been evident in history through mass extinctions. It's evident today through the extreme weather events that are unfolding around the world. And it's even evident through the little RNA coronavirus that has caused so much mayhem. These are all signs of the power of the Earth, both in history and today. More than that, Earth system science teaches us that the Earth is a complex system and is therefore inherently unpredictable. We can expect there to be tipping points, for example, in the process of climate change, but we will never quite know when and where they will come. That is in the nature of a complex system. So I think it's appropriate to say that relative to us humans, the Earth is a higher power. I'd like to think about that for a moment. So relative to us humans, the Earth is a higher power, not in a religious sense, but as defined by science and history. And here is our first problem, is that we know this, but do not feel it. So what's wrong with us? If we delve deep into human history and study the works of people like Emile Durkheim, Mary Douglas, and Mircea Eliade, we see that the first human societies formed around shared imagination of a greater power. And in their time, this imagination had a religious focus. It was such shared imagination that allowed the people of those first societies to orientate themselves in what felt like a very fragile world. Their imagination, as Durkheim showed, was buttressed by a whole series of festivals and rituals with special places like temples and ways of life like dietary rules, each helping to consolidate their society and help them to work together to meet the challenges they were faced with. Now, of course, in most Western societies, we no longer think like this. Our culture changed significantly as the traditional phase of human life moved into the modern. And the modern era, I believe, can be characterized as a displacement of our traditional shared imagination in a greater power, with a sense of mastery over the material world and a fundamentalist view of economics based on the free market. We now perceive, in late modernity, perceive the earth as a resource for our human societies. Economists still, even the most enlightened, speak of the earth as ecosystem resources or natural capital. We fail to perceive the earth as something of great value in itself. We see it as just there for us to use, and if it goes wrong, we think we will fix it. This, I believe, is a false attitude that pervades modern culture and fails to give the earth the respect that it is due. Our economic system also creates the second basic problem that I mentioned that we are faced with, which is our inability to work together across the world to face the challenges of environmental abuse. So the economic system prevents us working together, prevents us cooperating. Another way of describing this predicament is in terms of human-centeredness. This, I believe, is a natural human trait that goes back well before science and may even relate to the religious inheritance of the West, which tends to conceive the divine in human terms. If we remember the first scientific controversies, when Copernicus, for example, dared to say that the Earth went round the sun, the authorities were affronted because their human-centered conception of the world assumed the Earth, and therefore human beings must be at the center of everything. A similar scene was enacted when Darwin suggested that we'd evolved from apes. This was an affront to our lordly, human-centered conception of the animal world. I believe we are about to enter a third phase of human existence, beyond the world of traditional societies and beyond modernity. And this new phase will be marked by giving the deepest respect to the earth as one great and powerful system on which all life depends. This will happen, as I see it. It may happen dreadfully through catastrophe, or it could happen more peacefully through a process of transition. But one thing is sure, it will happen. We will move to a place where our societies are earth-centered rather than human-centered. We will give the earth the respect it is due. If we are to change this, if we are to achieve this change peacefully, then I believe we need to pay attention to how we can create shared imagination of our relationship with the earth. An imagination that feels, not just knows, and which allows us to work together all across the world. And to do that, I think we need to consider how traditional societies developed what I call the art of creating shared imagination. As I see it, there were three elements to this art. The first was conceptual. It was about polarizing concepts, which were in their day focused on distinguishing the sacred from the profane. Douglas, Durkheim, and Eliade both conclude that traditional societies made distinctions between sacred and profane as the very foundation of their culture. These things gave their minds shape and were expressed in every aspect of their lives, like in religious buildings or food systems, for example. And the fascinating thing, as I see it, is that we're already creating such concepts in our world today in response to the fragility that we're coming to feel about our place in the world. Take the word wilding, for example. Now, I don't know whether this has quite the international resonance that it has in the UK, but the idea of wilding has spread like wildfire here in the UK. And at its heart, it is about creating the deepest respect for nature and recognizing the regenerative power that is inherent in the natural world. Such concepts are interesting because they incorporate a set of feelings as well as ideas. Respect for the power of nature to regenerate itself in the concept of wilding sets up a contrast with the overmanaged natural environments of our current agricultural systems, for example, and creates feeling within us about the power of the earth as a system of life. We learn to love the wild and suspect the overmanaged places. And this, as I see it, is sacred and profane revisited and in relationship with the earth. In my book, I explore other words like organic, sanctuary, and pollution, which have similar conceptual power. A vital aspect of the art of creating shared imagination is that it should include everyone. And we have a problem here, I think. Our approach to climate change and biodiversity loss has so far been couched in very negative terms. I don't know if you feel this, but it seems to me like reporters outdo each other in discovering the next dreadful story about our abuse of the earth. Activists are protesting in such a manner that, demonstrations are, I suppose, sociologically ritualized threats to a society. And I think to some people, they appear to be that. While others join in with the rest of Western society in trying to manipulate our behavior in various ways, but perhaps in various better ways in this context. But the outcome of all that is ordinary people can feel very alienated by the whole environmental crisis agenda as it's presented through our public world. They might feel guilty, and they certainly feel that the whole thing is so big they can do nothing meaningful about it. And there is an ancient remedy to this. It is the power of festival. Today we know about the power of festival in relation to the arts, like music and literature. We think of Glastonbury in the UK and Hay on Wye, our big literature festival. And thousands of people are involved in those things. But we've not yet employed festivals specifically in celebration of our relationship with the earth. Emil Durkheim was absolutely clear that in traditional societies, festivals were a really important way that the community came together and not only consolidated their own existence, but they were also obviously related to whatever they considered the higher power. And I'm suggesting in this case, we should consider the earth in that context. So this is a new possibility, I think, to consider festivals in celebration of our relationship with the earth. So instead of being so negative about the way that we're approaching climate change and biodiversity loss, it is to turn it around the other way and to celebrate our relationship with the earth. And the key, I think, to including the mainstream of people may be to go small rather than big. We tend to think of big citywide events having the most impact in the world, but years of campaigning have taught me that big citywide actions tend to engage the same activists time after time and reduce everybody else to spectators. I believe that neighborhoods might be an interesting scale to work on in terms of festival. Going small might mean neighborhood scale. Neighborhoods might be taking on a new importance in our modern world, with home working, high streets declining, online ordering increasing. Is this the time when neighborhoods will come back into focus? I believe neighborhoods might be well placed to put on festivals in celebration of the earth that would include most people who lived in them and would be naturally inclusive of different cultures that were included in a neighbourhood. Here in a little part of northeast Bristol, which I live in, called Emerson's Green, we did such a neighbourhood festival this September in the equinox. We did a parade through the neighbourhood. Children brought wild flowers to put in a hazel sculpture. We did apple pressing. We had a rural themed band working on a Thomas Hardy theme, actually. We had an ecologist taking people on wildlife trails. We had a woodworking workshop. We did apple pressing. We did a wildflower walk and talk. We had a bee garden, lots of stuff for all ages. Relatively small, 400 people, straw bales, a big stretch tent. And it felt very good. It felt very good. And people came, and they obviously appreciated it. So it just occurred to me, because my mind thinks like this, what would happen if every neighborhood, not just in this country, but all around the world, celebrated their relationship with the earth through a festival? Perhaps an annual festival, maybe on one of the solstices or equinoxes. I wonder how that would feel. I have a sense that it could involve people in a way they're not currently involved at the moment, in a positive relationship to the earth, and therefore to the environmental crisis. I also think it could influence politicians. More of that in a moment. So we have conceptual advances like wilding. Now, is wilding common? Do I need to talk about the Nep estate, for example, here in Sussex, which has been where wilding has been popularised? This is a 3,500 acre estate in West Sussex, where Isabella Tree and Charlie Burrell turned over a traditional farm over to a wilding project, where they removed the fences and thought hard about how to let nature free, set nature free, really. They deliberately understocked it with animals, deer, Old English Longhorn cattle, Exmoor ponies, creatures such as that. But a lot of it was just left to develop as it wanted to. It was untidy. The farmers around criticized them for forgetting how to farm, but actually the result has been spectacularly interesting, and species have come back to the estate that have not been there for a long time. They've now got turtle doves, purple emperor butterflies, all sorts of really interesting things are happening there, simply through allowing the regenerative power of nature to take hold. So wilding, I think, is important. A few decades back, we could have looked at organic and thought about how that concept has shaped our thinking also. So we've got the conceptual, like wilding and organic. We have the social, as in festival, the potential for doing neighborhood festivals. And finally, I think the third part of the art of creating shared imagination is spatial. It's about setting places apart out of the deepest respect for nature. And I believe that here again, we're seeing a modern version of the sacred and profane distinction. Making places special, deliberately searching for a harmony between human society and the natural world. Such places can inspire our imagination. Like the Nep estate in Sussex, which has inspired thousands of people. Here in my own city of Bristol, there are community agriculture projects like Sims Hill, the community farm. We have Grow Wilder, which is an Avon Wildlife Trust initiative. There are orchards, woodlands, wildlife reserves, all working in various ways to find a new harmony between humanity and the earth. And I think neighborhoods may again play a vital role here. As people in neighborhoods identify natural places where they can offer the deepest sort of respect to nature around them. I'm fortunate here in Emerson's Green that within 100 yards of my house, although it's a suburban estate that was built, as most suburban estates are, they left many of the old hedgerows, and I've got an old drove road where the animals used to be driven just 100 yards from my house. We've foxes and badgers, and we even had otters coming into our local park this year. So it's been a really interesting place to get to know the natural world around us. We're now mapping the area to identify the natural places in our local area, and we've been developing a community orchard on forest garden principles for some years now, and we have an active group working on that in other places in the area. And I've become aware that working with local people on natural places in your neighborhoods is a wonderful way not only to build community life, but actually to begin to feel for the earth. The nature spaces around us can become like the earth in microcosm. To be in them is to commune with the earth itself. And therefore, a process of identifying, setting apart these special places in our own neighborhood, I believe can be a way, again, to include the mainstream of people and to begin to discover these feelings towards the earth. Fortunately, our local councils here in the UK have an overlapping agenda to that at the moment. They're encouraging everybody to make local nature action plans. And we'll be doing that, which is basically just to have a map of your area and to identify the places where nature is and where nature could be, where there are breaks, developing wildlife corridors and those sorts of things through your area so that your own wildlife can thrive. So I believe that. So 3 things: conceptual, festival, and setting apart natural spaces can work together to create shared imagination about our shared imagination of our relationship with the earth, in which we begin to feel that relationship, where we involve all sorts of people, and we gain then the ability to cooperate. Again, you see, I think if neighborhoods across the world identified nature in their own places, we might have an enormous impact as people did this in their space. And it would be below the level of the politicians. It would be below all the log jams that are stopping us doing anything. And therefore could be, if you like, positively subversive in our current difficulties. I believe that most political societies are far more responsive to the mood of the people than we tend to recognize. We tend to think, when we see COP26 and groan perhaps about the inability of the world to agree anything. Perhaps we need to recognize that our own, particularly the democratic politicians, are continually testing by means of focus groups and other things what the public will bear, how they will respond to the radical initiatives they might be called to put in place. And at the moment, I think they'd be right to be worried that the people would not vote for them if they went as radical as they need to go. And so the answer might lie with the people, that if we can shift the mood of the people, the attitude of ordinary people like myself, then the politicians will listen and will have confidence to do the things they need to do. And what's more, we will feel like we're actually playing a meaningful part in it all. So that's my introduction to this workshop. it's based on trying to listen to traditional societies and the way that they worked and the way that they shared imagination together, and applying that in a modern sense, in a scientific sense, to our relationship with the earth. And I'm very interested to hear what you think about that. Katie, over to you.
I think Ian is the one, actually.
Is it Ian doing it?
I think it's Ian, yeah.
Oh, right, okay. It's a shared effort, which is great. Thank you, Katie, and thank you, Chris, very much indeed for that introduction to the workshop. A couple of things for me immediately came out of that. I really love the idea of positive subversion. So that's another one for us to pursue in everything we do. I'm a great believer in subverting systems. The other thing is this difference between the sacred and profane, I think, is fundamental to so much of what we deal with. In critical systems thinking, this is one of the main topics, is to try to distinguish what we see as sacred and against, and the profane becomes the marginalized and the discriminated against, which is a really fascinating aspect of our work. The other thought was the sort of sense of regularity that's needed. Festivals that you've described, they sound absolutely fantastic, but do we need to think about how we put that into a regularity sense, that we keep having festivals, and through that we can sort of celebrate the cycles of nature in many ways as well, which seems to be something we need to reintroduce. So thank you. So those are my immediate thoughts for what you said, and I think I'd like to ask anybody else immediately if they've got any questions about what you've talked about before we go into sort of breakout sessions and discuss more closely the questions that you and the topics you've raised. I've just put in the chat there, I think I have, what you've actually mentioned in terms of the topics we could look at. And we'd take about 30 minutes for that. But so first of all, questions. We've got June and Eliza, I think. June first, yeah.
I'm on. Oh, I should have muted. Chris, that was a really wonderful talk. I have particularly worked with the changes of the seasons and those old rituals and finding the lost, what I call the lost grounding of our, I thought, natural connection to the earth. And my question to you, as Howard Gardner defines it in Frames of Intelligence, well, actually, the more recent works of multiple intelligence, natural or environmental intelligence, that I think is deeply innate in the children that I have taught for 50 years. But here's my question. Is it not education as well as that it's a combined and connected? I just feel like the whole neuroscience about the connected brain and the parts of the right brain that understand empathy and metaphor and global intelligences, that particularly sees the connection between art and environmental issues. And I love what you had mentioned about adding those kinds of elements.
Yes, I mean, so I think education is key. These things are just, that I've mentioned, are just a way in, really. And I think all sorts of things, I think the festivals, for example, could be a very interesting opportunity to engage in all sorts of artistic type projects. This, and to take up Ian's point, yes, the idea is to repeat them annually, maybe to do a major festival each year and some minor things to keep the momentum going. But the whole thing is educational. We've been, as adults, we've been learning how to do an ecology survey of our local area. and that's really great fun. And as I said, we discovered we've got otters. We never thought we had otters. They're supposed to be quite rare. So I think I mean, I would love for in the UK here we have a national curriculum, and I would love to develop schools which are based around the Earth. In other words, they teach the curriculum through Earth studies, and I think that could be done. We have a lady called Mary Colwell here in Bristol who's encouraging the teaching of natural history in schools again. But I think we could go a step further and actually develop Earth schools. That's there to be done, I think.
Thank you, Chris. Eliza.
Oh, hi, thank you. Thanks very much, Chris. That was really interesting. I'm just interested in it from a volunteer's perspective. So I'm moving to Bridport in Dorset, where I'm really wanting to do some local environmental work in my community there. And I'm wondering about the natural spaces and whether conceptually it's important to have a seamlessness between privately owned natural spaces at a small scale such as gardens and a larger scale such as school grounds and farms and public spaces, and if that conceptual seamlessness is helps facilitate ownership by the community, and how you kind of work with that, really. Yeah,
good idea. I love that. And I think private gardens are a great. We're just about to run a session called Gardening for Wildlife, which a few of the local people who are into gardening for wildlife will run, with the idea of getting people to think about their private gardens as part of natural space. So that will complement what we're then doing in the park and in other areas around our place. So absolutely. And I think there's an enormous opportunity for volunteering here. I mean, our little group that's been managing the orchard, we've done it for 10 years now, but this year's absolutely taken off. We've had 10 or more people every week, right up to December the 23rd. So much so that the space has become a bit overmanaged. You know, I've had to look for other things for us to do. So I think, and of course that's worked together with a social media presence and things like that. But yes, there's a great opportunity for volunteers, and I think that's part of how we're going to include people. Many of the people in our group managing the orchard, they're not environmental activists. They're not even they wouldn't think of themselves as environmentalists at all. They're simply interested in being part of a community, and they love this idea of being outside in the natural world. And we're learning together about that. So yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Right. Well, if everybody's okay, we'll go into breakout groups for about but till about 5:05, if that's okay, and then come back into plenary to discuss what we've come up with and ideas, and fire more questions at Chris, I hope. So if everybody's happy with that, I shall form 4 groups now, and if you could sort of introduce yourselves to each other and keep a track maybe of some very important questions that you come up with, and maybe some answers to sort of what Chris is asking for as well, particularly sort of methods by which such imagination can be created, which I think is a key for what we want to try to do today. So see you again soon if I don't meet you in a group somewhere. Thanks. Great. Rules. Design. Totally random, by the way. So whoever you get with, it's just chance has put you together. Thanks. Right. Brenda, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Well, I have to hit join, do I?
You have to join the group if you can. You're group 4 at the moment. There's only Kathy in there at the minute. Right. And Leonard has not joined the group there. Never mind. Oh no, that's forward. That's good. Right. How do I get in the group?
Hi, Jenna. We see you.
Hi everybody. That seemed to work. I'm glad to say, and it's safely back. There were some very fascinating discussions going on, and very wide-ranging as well. So this is now an opportunity for questions and feedback from those sessions to Chris. Chris, do you have anything, any comment or observation at this point?
No, I'd like to hear what people's reflections are. We had a good conversation in our group, but no, let's see what questions we want to ask.
Right, okay. Would anybody like to start off? If you put your hand up one way or another, that would be great. To sort of feedback some of the points. Tom, I think you were there. Thanks.
Yeah, I'd like to just pick up and raise a question that was just coming up at the end of our discussion, and there wasn't time to answer, but Brenda raised, and what kind of festivals are we talking about, and weaving together some of the discussion we had. There are two answers that occur to me on that, and one is very much influenced by George Mackay's treatment of the festival in Senseless Acts of Beauty and other similar work, of this site of cultural transgression, these spaces where the norms and the rules and the customs and expectations that govern our everyday lives can be temporarily suspended, so that people can often spontaneously just put in place a whole new set of rules, whole new ways of doing things, and of accepted thinking and discourse and action. And related to that, a point that I made right at the start about re-indigenization, which I think is something that your whole thesis, Chris, is very much moving towards, and the festival as sites that ritually enact a sense of belonging to a community that's conventionally grounded in place. But then I think Ian brought up a point, that's one point of this discussion, and others, of what happens again when there are people who aren't grounded in a place, who have these itinerant existences, or are in spaces where they don't feel a sense of connection with nature or access to nature, or where the discourses of relation to place, of identity, have been appropriated. This the example that came up being this elite discourse on Indigenous, on Britishness, that's been behind the whole Brexit agenda. So there's some of the, I think some of the the ideas that occur to me, but I'll put that if you want an articulated question to you, Chris, about what kind of festival. Not necessarily if I want to answer it, maybe rhetorical.
Well, for me, the bottom line is it's a festival in celebration of our relationship with the earth. That's the description I'd like to hold to. And then I'd like to see what people do with it. I love the idea of festivals. Festivals in history have been moments of blowout for a culture. They've been, as Tom says, they can be people setting new rules for themselves. Moments when the ordinary rules no longer apply. That has happened with festivals in history and could happen here in some circumstances if people want to take that road. I love the idea of them helping people feel like they belong to an area. Tom mentioned people who aren't grounded in a place. One of the exciting things for me with the little festival we did was to meet some people who were exiles from Hong Kong who'd just been out on a wildlife trail with Ed Druitt, our ecologist, and they were fascinated with what they'd found, but they also told me it helped them to feel at home. They'd just come from Hong Kong and going out on a wildlife trail, and they said it helped them to feel at home. Now, for me, that was success. That was doing what I wanted it to do. It was including people who might otherwise have felt excluded. So that's but the bottom line is let the festival be what it wants to be and let different places express it in ways they want to express it. But I think festival is an interesting avenue to explore.
Thank you, Chris. Right, Brenda? You're muted. Yeah.
Excuse me. Chris, I think your point about belonging is really amazing. I don't know if you know the writer John O'Donoghue, the late John O'Donoghue was the philosopher from County Clare in Ireland. But John, he was one with nature. There was nothing between John and Mother Earth, and he was consumed by the earth. And I had the joy of meeting John on the Aran Islands, and we had this profound kind of Beckett-like conversation, which of course you would with John. And as I was going away, he said, "Oh, and Brenda," and I said, "Yes, John," and he said, "Don't worry, it will come to you." And I use his words as a way of reassuring myself in life. But before he went back, even in January after Christmas, before he went back to Germany for his studies, he went in for a swim in the Atlantic. And can you imagine the cold? And he ran up and down the beach to let the sea water absorb into his skin, because he said, "I want to take back this sense of belonging to Germany with me." And I think that when people belong to something, they care, and when they're at one with it. And I think that's the point you made. And when I lived in New York, I loved New York so much, I wanted to belong. And people used to say to me, "Don't worry, when you live here 2 years, you'll be a New Yorker when you've lived here 2 years, because there's such a turnover of people. So after you were there 2 years, they called you a New Yorker." And I used to think like, wow, I come from Galway and now I belong in New York. So when you can create that level of emotion, that's what it's about. And I think that's what your festival is, exactly that.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Chris.
Right. Anybody else got a question or an observation at this stage? Leonard, you're muted.
This is actually a question for Chris, because the size of these, I agree with the notion of community, and then the question of size becomes an interesting one. For example, there is something at the University of Colorado that's been in place for years. It's called the Conference on World Affairs, and they have themes every year. They last a week, and they bring about 60 to 80,000 people to Boulder, Colorado every year to discuss issues. And so, you know, I can see the advantage of the small community. And I, by the way, Ian, I couldn't get into group 3 for some reason. It might have been my computer. I have no idea. But I did make a comment there that I would like to make to the whole group, that in the US, one of the interesting programs is what Minnesota started. Minnesota is converting all of their K through 12 schools to renewable energy. And as they do that, they're educating the children and the parents of the children in every one of these communities on what the advantages of renewable energy are over traditional carbon-based fuels. So, you know, there are some mechanisms. Now, Minnesota is the first state in the United States to do this. The interesting thing it doesn't really cost anyone anything, in the sense that you can convert the school using power purchase agreements with these companies that are cropping up everywhere that will put in either solar panels or wind turbines or whatever your favorite location has as a resource. The schools get a reduction in cost for energy of 15%. The companies make a decent profit, and the state doesn't have to, or the district doesn't have to put up any money. So there are these practical sort of things that are buried in the woodwork somehow that have to be ferreted out and combined with everything that this group is talking about. I don't know about I was talking to the people at the Council on World Affairs last year, and they were very enthusiastic about having a whole week on climate change and global warming and practical solutions that are cropping up around the world, including, by the way, the ITER project in France, which has 35 countries working on fusion, and a project in my old stomping grounds at MIT called Spark, which is another fusion project. So for the first time ever, people are getting more energy out of these fusion reactors than they had to put in. And most people think, you know, when they're getting twice as much out now, if they can get to 10 times in the next 20 years, it will replace a lot of the energy sources. So I wouldn't forget the science, but I think the population doesn't know that these things are happening. And they're sort of positive. When I read that France had 35 countries working on a fusion project and was able to generate energy out of their latest prototype, it's sort of exciting. By the way, all of the fusion people say, don't stop doing solar, don't stop doing wind, don't stop, because in the 20 years that we're facing, without moving away from carbon-based systems, the temperature of the Earth will just continue to rise, and will continue to rise even after we dump the carbon stuff. So I just point out that somehow the connection between the science community and the engineering community and the kinds of things that you people are talking about are really important to actually connect and know what's going on.
Yeah. Chris, what do you think about those sort of different communities there that we need to?
Well, I'm all for technological development, and I think that is happening quite well. But I just would like to say that I'm worried that this won't actually change our attitude. I think we have an attitude problem. I think we have a cultural problem. And that's what I've been trying to address. I think we could solve climate change and still have a problem in relating to the Earth. And that's to do with our culture, and that's why I'm approaching it the way I am.
Thank you, Chris.
What I'm saying is, it isn't a simple technical problem.
No, I didn't mean to imply that it was. I just think that it makes your approach a lot more, what's the right word? People will respond to the combination of the two, the sort of STEM stuff that I know June.
Yes.
You know, and the social interaction that's required because otherwise you're in a community of thousands, not billions. The billions are not aware of what's going on at the highest levels of the scientific community, including the politicians, by the way, who I've spoken to many of, and they are not aware of what's really happening at a technical level. So I think your community group should always be a mix of people. And given that there are universities and schools in all of these places, you can actually attract people to those community groups that and give them a place to speak about what they are doing.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think you're right. I absolutely agree, Leonard. We need to combine the two.
Yeah.
Thanks. All right, moving on then to Eliza. I think you're possibly
hi.
next year.
Yeah, this is just an observation, which is something I'd really like to do to take forward. Is you mentioned, Chris, doing like a mapping of nature spaces. And I was thinking, if you did a very localized mapping of nature space, the idea for a festival might come out of that, because you might find, for example, there's a really rare butterfly there and you could have that butterfly festival, or there might be an ancient well and you could have a water festival. And then that would help people bond with their real immediate locality to having a very sort of tailored thing that just arises out of it. And it could be something, and then that might also give an entry point into people bonding with nature, because you could say, well, look, we've discovered there's a rare butterfly here, so now everybody's going to do a butterfly survey on an hour on this coming Saturday or something. I can just see it sort of taking off through the mapping. So I'm going to do a mapping when I move to Bridport of my little domain around where I live.
Right. Certainly at the festival we explore our local area, and that includes all the places we're currently involved in. So we'll do a walk around the community orchard and explain what we've done and what's special, and I might show people where there's some badgers and where the otters were filmed and things like that. So yeah, I agree, but mapping might be a good way in.
I just want to say thank you to you, Chris, because everything that you've said is really relevant and helpful for me at this point in time in the two communities where I live, have lived, still work, and one where I live and starting to work. And so one is Cardiff, which is very urban, and the other is Llandilo in Carmarthenshire, which is a very small town in the very green area. And in both places, I'm involved in some projects which are about greening, really, I suppose, call them environmental broadly, and also festivals, but not tying the two things together. And you've given me so many ideas just now in both neighbourhoods.
Right.
And we're just entering into the planning and discussion stage about where we want to go with our festivals and where we want to go with our sort of growing wilding greening projects. And like tying the two things together, I think gives the opportunity to amplify it, and I love it. So I'm going to, tomorrow evening, I'm going to be taking some of your ideas to our planning meeting for the Llandilo Festival, which is next November. And you've just given me so many ideas just now.
Brilliant, thank you very much. That's encouraging. What I'm exploring, I said to our group, is the idea of doing something that might be called Neighbourhoods for the Earth or something like that. So this, you might do Llandilo for the Earth, or what, something which would be a combination of festivals and nature places, building community life around a new sensitivity towards the Earth.
Well, they're doing a participatory budgeting pilot in Llandilo, and they're just entering into the voting stage of it. So everybody with a Llandilo postcode votes on these projects that have been put forward, and most of them have got some sort of greening theme. You know, there's an orchard, there's a bee bomb, there's stuff linked with the schools, which is kind of intergenerational, and so the opportunity for community and festival activity, I think, can be tied together in our neighbourhood here. Yeah.
Thank you, Sheila. Lovely. Richard, I think you're maybe next.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, Chris, really, really good. The thing that struck us in our little group was the maybe the impact of having lists of ideas and suggestions, so we can see which ones resonate with our own local circumstances, perhaps in some way gathered around particular themes or aspects to it. Because we all immediately started thinking, okay, what could we do in our area, and started coming up with lists of ideas. And Kathy's on the call here. We're working together in our local community and privately sending messages to each other saying, are you hearing what he's saying here? Because it resonated very strongly. And just to go back to the science versus the culture thing, it's very interesting. But things like the understanding of soil, of carbon sequestration in soil, immediately brings you into if you like, a worship of the soil. So composting is not just a labor of effort; it's a labor of love. It's actually getting your fingernails dirty, and it becomes a ritual act. So getting that kind of sense that, and I mean, you talk to any gardener, actually, it's a ritual, isn't it? So it's only tapping that thing which is happening anyway. It's just making it polite to talk about it, perhaps.
Yeah, and making it special. Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Douglas.
Hi, thanks for the talk, Chris. There's some really interesting ideas coming out of it. My question is, it's kind of informed by a background in working in this stuff in a lot of ways, specifically mostly Extinction Rebellion. One thing that comes up a lot in my experience is these kinds of positive efforts will run into questions that are very emotive and alive at the moment to do with access, basically. So I'm imagining these kinds of schemes might, like these kinds of festivals, might at some point open up to difficult questions about basically the only people who can do them are the ones with the privilege, so to do, and it would kind of get slanted in that direction. And it might be like very nice for the people who are able to do them, but that might only be like a third of the population or something like that. Is this something you're like thinking about? Do you have like responses in mind for how access to people?
I've been aware of these sorts of issues for a long time, Douglas. You know, the idea that what you do excludes people sort of by mistake often. And that's partly why I've settled on neighborhoods, because it seems to me that that can be a naturally inclusive space. You know, we have in Bristol, you know, communities like Easton, which are enormously multicultural, or St Paul's more famously. And so to do this sort of thing on a neighborhood basis it seems to me to be naturally inclusive. And the other thing I found in quite a long time working on the land is that the land is a great leveler. You know, people come together. It doesn't matter what they're wearing. It doesn't matter what, you know, they can choose what they do, and you can work hard to include people. And I've done various things that are deliberately inclusive on the land. And it seems to me all that can come into this, but we don't have to, and as I say, I think neighborhoods are the way to gather without being exclusive.
I mean, I can back that up with our experience over the last 2 years in inner city Cardiff, which is in South Riverside, which is probably the most multicultural community in Wales, with you know, at least 50% of the population from Asian background. And so we've been running something through the pandemic called Greening Riverside, which has been fantastic at engaging people who are marginalised. So we've been doing plant giveaways and various events that are just easy to access, just really, really easy to access, and easy ways, like using WhatsApp groups because of social distancing and all of that, to get talking about growing. And out of that have come, you know, various like street groups, neighborhood groups, connections between women who are often, you know, really quite isolated from, you know, mainstream education because of language barriers, because of poverty barriers, because of childcare barriers. And actually, I agree, greening can be a leveler. You know, like planting, growing, just in your own garden. Big opportunities to be inclusive.
Thank you. Kathy.
Thank you. I just want to pick up on a point about how we perceive nature. So I'm an ecologist, and when I'm sometimes engaging in certain sectors, I'm thinking particularly of some of my yoga colleagues. I do yoga, and I put in the chat, the yoga scene is quite interested in getting back to ideas of festival and connecting with nature. It's an emerging scene. But in my teacher training, I was quite keen on being devil's advocate and pointing out that most of nature is nasty and it affects our values. And when we're thinking about engaging with wider communities of people, this is where in my work, not so much now, but 10, 20 years ago, really hit the buffers, and that was around the invertebrate crisis, before we knew about insect Armageddon, that only sort of came to light in the last few years. Insect conservation is getting nowhere and no funding because people don't like bugs. They don't like invertebrates at all. They're frightened of them. Okay, so there was a huge barrier to doing this. And then a few years ago, a study came out that it's been sampling invertebrates for 20 years, isn't it? And has showed this enormous decline in invertebrate numbers. And now public perception of invertebrates has totally shifted, particularly around the importance of pollinators. But my challenge to everybody on the group is to connect with those bits of nature. This is a little exercise that will challenge for everybody, to go and connect with those nasty bits of nature that they don't like. Because all of nature is all around us. It's not out there, it's in your house, and you probably clout it with a slipper if you see it. Okay, yes. So I'm talking about spiders. Now, arachnophobia is a very real thing, and I do respect you if there's genuine fear there. But my own fear from childhood was culturally inherited, and I worked on it because I'm an ecologist. How stupid to be frightened of spiders. They're such a key group in our environment. So my challenge to people is the next time you see a spider, get it under the glass with a bit of cardboard. It's safe in there. Connect with it. Have a look at it. Study it. Look for the other spiders around your house. Take it further. Invest in a little magnifying glass of a proper natural history supplier, 10 times magnifying glass, and start looking more closely at where you are, because a lot of the nature crisis, I'm going to pick up on Chris's theme of going small, and I'm not going to ask you to think of the really small, because a lot of the biodiversity crisis is in what's called the smaller majority, which make up 95% of our biota. So that's the point I wanted to make, a bit of a fun challenge. And it's an interesting part of resolving the crisis and connection, because there's also this perception, because identifying insects to knowing what species it is, for a lot of them, it's really tricky and complicated. And it's created a huge divide between, oh, we've got to be experts and you've got to understand how to use all these keys and so on. And so something I'm interested in bringing into the work I've done with Richard is getting more people looking at insects, because we used to have the problem around the invertebrate crisis that we've got a catastrophic shortage of taxonomic expertise, because we used to focus on what is it and trying to give it a name in a Linnaean sense. The crisis is so bad, the question has shifted, I think, to have we got anything at all, which is a much more inclusive question that loads more people can engage with. So that's just the point I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. As an arachnophobic, I'm going to be tested on that one to actually go out and love a spider. But I will try. I like them outside, but in the house, we don't kill them. We get rid of them. And but I take your point very much. Chris, have you any thoughts on spiders?
No, I mean, we became aware of our ignorance really about insects, because we did we did go out with sweep nets and attempt to identify insects in our park, and just you were just overwhelmed by our ignorance, really, and had so much to learn. So thank you, Kathy.
Mike, your question there.
Yeah, I suppose I've just been reading recently the new book by Ian McGilchrist, The Matter of Things. I don't know if people know him. He wrote Master and the Emissary was the other book that he wrote. And there's a chapter in there. I've just been jumping around it. It's a massive book, just to warn you, anyone who's going to buy it. It's really long. But there's a whole section in there about the sacred and religion and sort of this like sort of, he talks about how certain things can't be explained like by science, etc., etc., and we should have the space to have that. And he talks about awe, the idea of awe in particularly he does talk about nature, but he also talks about sort of, you know, beautiful pieces of music and love, etc., etc. And there's something for me about you know, and he does speak a little bit of, because I've also been reading quite a bit of David Bohm, that as Tom would know, because we've chatted about it recently, but this idea of, you know, us being separate from nature and the separation of us from everything else around us. And that seems to me to be actually the fundamental issue that we have in relation to sort of not just nature, but polarization. And it's, you know, the fact that we can go to war with each other, the fact that we can destroy the stuff that sustains us, the fact that, you know, that we can have, there's groups of in conflict with each other within society, etc., etc. And I just wonder how, like, it does feel like there does need to be some sort of form of shift in consciousness, not just around nature, but around sort of how we are situated within, for want of a better word, I suppose, in the cosmos and the universe, and against each other. I wonder what thoughts you have on that, Chris. Do you see like these festivals or these sorts of events as being spaces where, you know, that shift, you know, that you talked about earlier, actually, the shift about, I can't remember how you framed it about, but in relationship to the planet and etc. But how do we shift that consciousness in this society which is so consumer driven and so based on extraction and separation?
Yes, so you're covering a lot of ground there, Mike. I have, what I've said is a serious attempt to explain or to approach the things that you're talking about. And I love Ian McGilchrist. Well, I read The Master and His Emissary, and so I'll read this latest one. But there is a need for a change of culture. And what I'm saying is, in terms of sacred, is that there's a whole set of feelings that were known to traditional societies but have been lost in modernity, which we need to recover, and we need to recover those particularly in relation to the earth. And that's pretty much all that I'm saying, that we could reimagine our culture through the discovery of a new sensitivity towards the natural world. And I think, I mean, I've kicked around, I've done various things in Bristol with a local currency called the Bristol Pound, with community agriculture project, with a retail food, local food distribution thing, with community food centres for disadvantaged people. And they're all really trying to reimagine our culture. That's really what they're about. And I'm coming at this as a way in to all that, to all the stuff I've been exploring for the last 10 or 20 years. This is a way in for everybody, where we can just begin to relate to the earth, begin to feel for our relationship with the earth and with each other, but on a new basis, not as consumers, but actually as participants in this one great and powerful living system we're all part of. That's the hope. That's the aim. But I don't want to pretend I've solved everything, you know. And, yeah.
I always feel like just one point, just one response to that, because I was also reading a book a couple of years ago by this guy Roberto Unger about like, do we need a sort of different a new form of religion? And it feels to me like it almost is like this belief system or this new consciousness is sort of like, I'm not really down with religion, organized religion, but in the sense of like, it does feel like we do need like, it is some sort of religious thing, because festivities and celebrations and rituals, they're all sort of a religion, for want of a better word.
Yeah, there's no metaphysical belief system implied or required in this, and the scientific description of the Earth is quite adequate to our needs to develop the initiative that I've described. But it's our feelings towards the Earth, our emotional response towards it, that we need, it seems to me, to discover.
Thank you, Chris, and everybody who's asked questions. If there's anything more burning, please put your hand up. But it strikes me that your concept, Chris, about shared imagination about the Earth leads on very much to a shared imagination about the future of the Earth, and I think that's something that we need to bring forward all the time. That there's a lot to think about what's coming towards us in the next few decades at least, and it's grounding ourselves in what the Earth is now is going to help us so much to think about with the future of the Earth and what we're doing to it, how we're doing it. I had a conversation earlier today with somebody who's very concerned about technology, and in particular the concepts of everything being a sensor, everything being connected into vast networks of observation and surveillance about us, and leading on into concepts of the metaverse and us all having digital twins. And it made me think a little bit about I hate to say it, my great nephew, who's 15-year-old and spends vast amount of his time glued to a screen, and very soon glued on with a headset around his eyes, looking into a completely alien world, as far as I'm concerned. But that's where many people will be seeing the future, and huge, gigantic companies like Facebook want that to actually happen. They want our reality to be obtained through the screen rather than going out there and playing with spiders. So that's I think is a huge concern that we need to bear in mind as we go forward. But the more we can do what you're suggesting, I think is vital. So all strength to what you're putting forward today.
Can I just,
last words to you, Chris?
Can I just, for a last word, can I just say, if you'd like to follow up on this or on my experience as it develops, then there's a blog site, imaginationisthekey.website, which I've got articles on which cover in more detail, and I hope interesting, on the subjects I've covered today. And it also points to the book, Imagination is the Key to Unlock the Environmental Crisis, which is an ebook, which is published and available if you want to follow up this at a deeper level. Thank you.
Just one question on that, Chris. I checked it for your book, but is it only available on Amazon?
It is at the moment, but it might well be available on something else. What would you like it to be on, Brenda?
Anything but Amazon. I just think that we have to walk the talk, you know. I don't do Amazon.
Absolutely. Well, I'm very happy to put it on other, you know, as someone who has to do it oneself. You know, you don't have a publisher working for you.
No, I completely understand.
You have to find the way that you can do it. But I'll have a look at the others and see what I can do.
I just contacted Ireland for a number of books, Small is Beautiful. I contacted a bookshop in Galway, and they promised me they would arrive before Christmas, and they haven't arrived yet. Irish Post, you know, but it's better than the Italian Post.
Yeah.
But now I just want to just draw your attention to the fact that now this is very interesting also for Schumacher, that people who are on mainland Europe and in Ireland, not in the, you know, not in the UK, that now we have all this question of duties and taxes and whatever when we order books, no? So there is another reality now. If I want an English book, I'm searching to find it in a place other than the UK, because first of all, the post is a different matter. There's resistance and there are taxes.
Right.
Not for the money issue. It's just like,
Yeah.
from my point of view, like if I want to order books, you know, I want to find it the easiest possible way.
Yeah.
And not Amazon, who are conglomerates, you know.
Thank you, Brenda. Lovely. Well, thank you, everybody, and in particular, let's give a big thank you to Chris for a fantastic workshop.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay. Thank you.
I hope we go on from this group, this wonderful group.
Oh yes, you're very welcome. Any future event, we'll let you know. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Happy New Year.
Yeah. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Right.
Great to see you, June. Let's be in touch.
Yes, Tom, definitely. I've been looking for you and it's time. It's time to
great. Give me a shout.
get in
Let's
touch.
catch up soon.
More in touch.
Thanks, Sen. See you soon.
Okay,
soon.
see you.
Bye,
See you
folks.
all.
Bye.
Bye.